everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Green Table Talks, a monthly intergenerational conversation on all things environmental justice from the Black and Latinx perspective. My name is Lala Guerrero, and I am the co-host of the Green Table Talks. Today our topic is Black, Brown, and Blue, the mental health and climate crisis. We are joined by fabulous advocates from all over, truly, that are leading in the intersections of these issues. This is going to be a really, really incredible conversation, and I know that all of y'all will enjoy it just as much as we are. I'm going to turn it over to Felipe for him to introduce himself and also to introduce some of our panelists for today.
Thank you, Wow, and I'm really excited that this is our second one, and we're really excited to have this conversation happening right now during May, which is Mental Health Month, Mental Awareness Month. Very important for our community, especially coming out of a pandemic, coming out of all the struggles, all the effects of climate change. So it's a very meaningful and timely conversation. And I'm just gonna get started introducing some of our guests. I'm just gonna mention their names and I will let them introduce themselves. But we have from Puerto Rico, my good friend Wanda Torres, Dr. Wanda Torres. We also have Dr. Diana Ramos in LA. And who else do we have, Wawa?
And we have Neil Leedon, who is joining us, I believe, from the Bahamas now. I think he just landed back home today, right?
Yes, just got back in here in the Bahamas.
Yes, and we're so excited to have you here and have such a really broad array of people from really all over, which is really exciting.
All right, so I would like to each one of you to take a minute to introduce yourself, and let's start with you, Dr. Ramos. Do you mind introducing yourself and saying a few things about your expertise?
Hello, my name is Dr. Diana Ramos, and I'm an obstetrician gynecologist. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm on the National Hispanic Medical Association Executive Board, as well as adjunct faculty at the Keck USC School of Medicine, and the chair for the American College of Obstetricians Gynecologists, California. Thank you.
Dr. Torres from Puerto Rico, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I am Dr. Wanda Torres. I work as child and teenager psychologist here in Puerto Rico. Also, I am a yoga instructor with clinic approach for kids and for adults. I used to integrate mind and body. We are in Puerto Rico. I used to integrate mind and body complementary strategies like yoga, meditation, and mindfulness as part of the healing process. And I'm glad to be here with you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Everyone, so happy to be here this evening. My name is Neil. I am an environmental and climate justice activist from the Bahamas. And what most of my work centers around is the amplification of the voices of BIPOC individuals, especially those on the front lines of the climate crisis. So I'm very happy to be here to share this space.
We are so excited that all of y'all have joined us for this conversation. So we're gonna just jump into some of these questions and really get down to the nitty-gritties of these issues. So I think a lot of us understand that as we understand more about climate change and even experience the impacts of climate change related disaster, we understand that it has a huge impact on mental health. In fact, the American Psychological Association recently surveyed that 2/3 of adults in the United States said that they experience at least a little eco-anxiety and or ecological grief. So I'd love to hear from all of you, where have you seen ecological grief come up in your work or even for yourself personally?
Yeah, so I can start. So in terms of eco-anxiety and ecological grief, I've seen quite a bit of that in the Bahamas, especially in the last 2 years since Hurricane Dorian. And it's become more and more prevalent as the climate crisis wages on. And so what that looks like in the Bahamas is individuals experiencing immense amounts of what we now know as eco-anxiety as the hurricane season approaches, which starts on the 1st of June and runs throughout the end of November. And so what that looks like here, especially for communities that have been ravaged by hurricanes like Hurricane Dorian, like Hurricane Joaquin, like Hurricane Floyd, Hurricane Andrew, it looks like individuals being super tense at the start of the season. We have individuals that panic shop a lot. So they sometimes overstock, and then when it doesn't go to use, they become lethargic. And so individuals tend to be caught off guard in some instances. Another thing that I've been noticing a lot in terms of ecological grief is just individuals becoming super, super despondent when it comes to issues surrounding the environment, especially when it has to do with things that they may feel is out of their control. So it's definitely a thing here, but the issue here is that individuals don't, um, I would say, they don't recognize it as eco anxiety just because it's something that's been so heavily co opted. So people just think it's them surviving. However, those of us that are in the sphere of climate justice, we know the effect. Additionally, people don't know this, but my mom is a mental health nurse as well. So just having those conversations with her in terms of health and the environment and climate, it's been super rewarding in terms of just giving me the background knowledge and information to not do the work only, but also to make the knowledge accessible for individuals on a more localized scale.
Dr. Torres, would you want to talk about a little bit what your experience in Puerto Rico?
Well, climate change and related disasters and the pandemic too can cause anxiety-related responses as well as chronic and severe mental health disorders, flooding, strokes, hurricanes, storms, earthquakes, and the trauma of losses from a disasters, such as losing a home, a job, being disconnected from the community and the neighborhood, the loved ones, have been associated with elevated levels of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. But also, it's very important to say that these changes can be associated with increases in aggressive behaviors, domestic violence, substance abuse, and suicide. In my experience as a child psychologist, I have seen this climate grief or ecological grief in children and teens whose parents have had to move from their towns. These have been common after Hurricane Maria here in Puerto Rico and after the earthquakes in the south of the island in the beginnings of the 2020. The change derived from these moves cause pain and distress in the patients because they lose stability, contact with their community, contact with the family, and people and places they love. So it causes anxiety, stress, anhedonia, anger, irritability, and a difficulty to accepting situations that they can't control and they are living them, those situations.
And as an obstetrician gynecologist in women's health, we're noticing that there is a drastic increase in not only depression, but anxiety in pregnant women. And this is really important to realize because women are the ones that impact the whole family. So it's not only the health of the mother, but it's also the pregnancy that she has. It could be one, twins, maybe even. And so her health, and the health of her babies, if severe depression sets in, can really be impacted. We know that on average, about 20% or 1 in 5 women will experience some type of depression. About 80% of all women will experience the baby blues. And unfortunately, this is disproportionately higher in women of color because we know that there is overall increased stress, not only from being pregnant, but also right now because of COVID. We have, unfortunately, our homes that are becoming the schools, that are becoming the daycare centers, the place of work, and along with having to take care of the family and the daily needs. So there's a lot more stress that has come into play. It's really important that we recognize that addressing the fact that depression can be present or even anxiety needs to be addressed. Many times in our communities, in the Latino population and the Black population, we don't like to talk about it. We say that this is something that really doesn't exist. and it's better to just ignore it. But we can't ignore it because we need to take care of the mothers. We need to take care of the children. And if you actually look at the bigger scope, it's the entire family. Because if the mother, the core of most families, is not doing well, then oftentimes there can be loss of interest in terms of doing daily things. So she may not be caring for her family, caring for the other children that are there, which is really critical. So it's really important to realize that mental health is something that unfortunately is common, and right now because of COVID has increased even more. So slowly we're going to start to see the significance of the impact. Remember that women who are depressed and continue to do so after having a baby, actually that health of the baby is affected as well because the milestones for development and learning can be delayed. So this is a really critical, important topic that we address.
Completely agree, Dr. Ramos. We're actually looking at some numbers, some statistics. Even though communities of color are disproportionately affected by climate change, by eco-anxiety, by all, I mean, we're all living through what I will probably characterize as a collective trauma of COVID. But on top of that, we're going what Dr. Torres and Neil mentioned, hurricanes, floods that unfortunately are affecting our communities the most. Yet the numbers of mental health experts, of psychologists that or identify themselves as Latino um, are looking at 7% according to the American Psychological Association. Fewer than 3% are identify themselves as Black, and even only 5.5% of these therapists can conduct their work in Spanish language, and that's a problem. And if we are trying to really get to the core of the issue, we need to address that. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, particularly you, Dr. Ramos, and Dr. Torres, which you're working with Latino communities, with those communities that language may be even an added impediment. So would love your thoughts and your reactions to this.
Yeah, so you give really good numbers. And the really critical thing to be aware of is that if you're looking just at the Latinx population, in the United States, we represent 18% of the entire US population. Unfortunately, we're only about 6 to 7% of all doctors. And so, you know, there's no way that we can we can train enough physicians that are Latinos to meet the demand. So that means we have to partner, we have to work with each other to help each other understand each other's culture. What does it mean when we talk about mental health? Do you even say mental health, or do you say estoy nerviosa, right? Because we don't say mental health, we say nervios. You know, what are the words in the Caribbean community that we want to use so that patients and those who we're dealing with can understand this? We want to meet people where they are, and that's where we have to help each other, to train each other, to teach each other on what are the right words, what are the languages. And Dr. Torres, I would love to hear your input.
Well, the Latino and Black community in the US is very diverse, including people from many different nations and regions of the world. These communities have the vulnerability to mental illness as other communities, but they face disparities in both access and quality of treatments. Because all those things that said Dr. Ramos. This inequality puts these communities at a higher risk of more severe and persistent forms of mental health conditions. The implications of these statistics are many, but I can mention some important barriers that have people when they will search for mental health care. The language barrier, the poverty and the less health insurance coverage, the lack of cultural competence. That's a very important thing. As Dr. Ramos said, estoy nerviosa. Ajá. Oh, tengo el corazón roto. My heart is broken. It's not literally that my heart is broken, but maybe yes, because I'm so sad or I'm so anxious or I'm so nervous. And that's what is important, the cultural competence, because the cultural difference may lead mental health providers to misunderstand or misdiagnose members of the community. The legal status. For immigrants who arrive without documentation, the fear of deportation can prevent them from seeking help. And that's an important thing that we have to look. The acculturation, the stigma. No, la gente que va al psicólogo o al psiquiatra están locos,
Están
están
locos.
locos. Esto es para gente loca. The people that go to psychiatric or to a psychologist, they are crazy. That's for crazy people. No, that's not true. That's not true. All of us can go to a psychiatric or a psychologist. And that stigma makes that individuals may not seek for treatment because they not recognize the signs and the symptoms of mental health conditions, and they don't know that they have to search for help. The need for mental health services increases in the aftermath of a climate disaster or a climate related disaster, or with the COVID, the pandemic. And at the same time, there is a decrease in the availability and the accessibility of services, especially for our community. So I think that in order to change this dynamic, we must educate people and educate mental health professionals. We must educate people so they can realize that mental health is important as physical health, so they can understand the symptoms of the mental illness and seek for help, and to break that stigma. And in other hand, professionals working with Latino and Black communities have to have the appropriate cultural competencies in order to fulfill the needs of the people they help. This refers to the ability to recognize that culture plays a large role in a person's health and well-being, and may sometimes affect providers' ability to serve, to best serve the patient's needs. We have to serve the patient's needs, know our needs as professionals, and that's very important to look.
Yeah, I think all of these connections are really, really important to bring up. About a year ago, I wrote this article for Vice where I talked about the duality that people of color experience with climate grief, in the grief of being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis and white supremacy, and also the grief of being forgotten in an environmental movement, right? When we talk about the statistics of the lack of representation of folks in the mental health sphere, we see a lot of similar dynamics within the environmental sphere. So oftentimes, I think maybe there are alternate spaces that could also help provide this care that is culturally competent and is able to address the current and impending impacts of climate change. So Neil, I feel like you also have so much to say on this topic in regards to the lack of representation of folks of color, not only in the mental health sphere, but also in the climate change sphere, which is a really, really important dynamic to bring about, because when we're talking about climate grief, we also have to understand that climate grief and its impacts on our communities definitely isn't equal. Communities that are experiencing climate change first and worst right now, which tend to be Black and Brown communities around the world, are experiencing this duality of climate grief, of experiencing the grief associated with seeing our homelands being impacted by natural disaster, while also knowing that with lack of action that we're seeing, this disasters are only going to continue to happen, as well as the grief of almost feeling forgotten in a movement that is dedicated to ensuring that we have a just climate future. So I was wondering about your thoughts about if there are any like alternative spaces that exist that can help support Black and Brown communities in battling climate grief, and what role our organizing spaces can have in this, especially since burnout is something that I know we've talked about, and is something that a lot of us youth organizers experience in the climate space. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, Wawa. So you mentioned something that's super important, and that's heritage. And heritage loss in relation to the climate crisis is a major, major contributing factor to mental health and the decline of mental health in Black and Brown individuals. And so I think the moment that I really, really got heavily invested was when I participated in Sail for Climate Action. And in terms of representation, I did it 100% because of the representation. And just for the simple reason that I didn't know anyone that looked like me or was from a place like the place I'm from that was a part of the conversation, just the discourse surrounding climate action. And those kinds of spaces, those kinds of organized events, those are very important because they not only look great for optics and show that there are other people out there, but what they do is they create a space for individuals to speak up and to be heard because, like you mentioned, so many of us feel forgotten, so many of us are overlooked, and it may not be very intentional by everyone, but there's a huge degree of just a lack of diversity when it comes to this kind of conversation, and it paints the perception that everything's fine, whereas we're on the front lines. I live in the Bahamas, and it's a tourist destination, and people love it here, and it's sunny and it's beautiful. On the flight home today, like individuals were clapping when we landed because they were so happy to be here. But there's a disparity that takes place because I'm here and I'm on the front lines, and I know firsthand the damage that is caused because of the climate crisis, particularly. And so just being in a space that you feel represented is so important. Um, I'm a part of the Bad Activist Collective, and a part of the work that we do is to dismantle systems of oppression, and not just heavy systems like white supremacy and misogyny, but also systems that people think are maybe not as aggressive. And that's things like acquisition of food and water resources. Those are issues like mental health, of course. And so for me personally, I take it very, very seriously. Like I mentioned earlier, my mom is a mental health nurse, and that has been such a huge informing factor in a lot of the work that I do, just because I'm able to now contextualize what it is that I study and what it is that I've been seeing for the last 21 years of my mom's career. And like everyone here has mentioned, Black and Brown communities, we are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. So spaces like the Bad Activist Collective, Wawa Yes Space, Black Girl Environmentalist, Generation Green, these are spaces that I've learned so much from. And the people and the activists, the artists, the change makers that visit these spaces, when I see them, I feel so incredibly empowered because I know that just a few years ago, this wasn't a thing. This wasn't always the case, and we have so much more work to be done. However, I think that the representation that we're getting now is just honestly the beginning, and there's a lot more to be done.
Yeah, I think you just made so many great connections there, because when I think about our organizing spaces and the places that we're really reclaiming our time in, right, in Bad Activist Collective and Black Girl Environmentalist and Generation Green, we're really building community and being able to talk about these issues candidly in ways that I feel like oftentimes we weren't able to talk about ecological grief, for instance. And when we congregate virtually or in person today in the spaces that we're cultivating in our communities, we're able to talk about those things. And I think that those spaces that we're cultivating are the soil to which we are seeding the future, and really laying this foundation for a just climate future. However, I do really want to talk about the phenomenon of activist burnout, because it's something that I think is something that needs to also be dismantled as we're working towards ensuring that our organizing spaces are laying this foreground for a just future. So I'd love to hear, your definition of activist burnout and what you think we can do to really address this issue, to make sure that the burnout that we're experiencing isn't exasperating the grief that we're experiencing in the face of climate change, and to make sure that our organizing spaces really are sustainable for health, because like many organizers say, we can't save a burning planet when we're burned out ourselves.
That's such a loaded statement because I think that burnout culture, in a sense, is kind of celebrated. I think that lots of young people, especially, we have taken it upon ourselves to do the heavy lifting when in actuality the problem wasn't started by us, and the problems, um, from what I can tell now, they will outlive us for generations to come. And so burnout culture to me, it means individuals just prioritizing the work over the worth that it has on their mental health. And it's incredibly scary because I've been there so many times. I know you've been there, and so many individuals, so many activists that we interact with have been there. And how I feel that can be combated is a very simple remedy. It sounds simple, it kind of is simple, but I know it's very difficult to do, especially when your community is on the line. And that is practicing rest as a form of resistance. I feel like individuals should practice rest as a form of resistance just because I feel as though most of the heavy lifting has been put upon communities of color. And it's really unfair because most of the climate crisis, if not all of it, has very little to do with these communities. And so we're seeing individuals who are activists in the Philippines, in the Caribbean, in communities like Flint. We're the ones that are out there and we're rallying for change. However, I feel as though that burden to carry, it's not something that we should celebrate as much as it seems to be celebrated to burn out. And because if you burn out there, then who's going to do the work?
Absolutely. And I want to pivot back to the actual work that it's this comprehensive or holistic approach to mental health and generally to healthcare. And I know Dr. Torres, she's also a yoga teacher, and I actually first met her or know about her work because she was doing some amazing yoga sessions in El Yunque National Forest of all places. So we're very jealous and we want to go. But but Dr. Torres, we'd love to hear a little bit about that line of work, and especially with children. And most important, after all of the trauma that Puerto Rico has gone after Maria, earthquakes, pandemic, political distress. I mean, it has been a lot, and I would just like to hear your approach and the fantastic work you're doing with particularly with children.
Well, I started to search about integrative and holistic strategies to work with myself in 2016. I started with mindfulness and the integration of spirituality and meditation in my own process. Then in 2017, before the Hurricane Maria, I became a yoga teacher for kids. I never imagined in that time that I would be kids psychology. That wasn't planned. Yo no planifiqué eso. Then after the Hurricane Maria, I became yoga teacher for adults, and the training focused in heal in that we can heal people with yoga and with those complementary strategies. Uh, as I said before, I did it for me, but in the way I realized that if all those strategies help me in my own process and my own understanding of the life and the things that were happening in that moment and that are happening right now, and the healing process and the energies and the love, the compassion, it would be selfish that not to share it with other people. So I decided to integrate all of those things in the healing process with my patients. After Hurricane Maria and after the earthquakes, and when start the pandemic, I work directly in the communities as yoga teacher and first responder. And the mind and body strategies are likely a balm, but at the same time, add enhancers in the healing process. It helps to understand the importance to be here and now no matter what is happening, and or no matter what the circumstances are. And that understanding allows us to enhance our well-being by the acceptance that there are things that we can't control, and the commitment and improves in us the commitment of those things we can do. In the same line of Neil said that the burnout, I think that these strategies, yoga, mindfulness, meditation, spirituality, are self-care herramientas. I don't know how to say that, strategies. So the people that are first responders or are in the front line can do to allow themselves to have a better improvement of the work, or a better descanso, mejor autocuidado, vamos, self-care. Those are strategies to self-care from patients, for the community, and for the people that responds in disasters, or that are first responders in self-care. It's very important to take the time to work with the body, with the mind, with the energy, and with the spirit, so we can make a good balance, because we are holistic. We are the whole thing, not only one.
Absolutely, Dr. Torres. Dr. Ramos, in your practice, would love to hear a little bit your experience on, especially with those communities in immigrant communities, disadvantaged communities, and moms, because as you mentioned, they're taking the burden and they care for the whole family. They're the pillars of their family. So we'll love to hear your thoughts and your experiences.
Definitely. And I want to acknowledge Dr. Torres's recommendations. I think they're fantastic. And Neil's recognition that burnout really is critical. And I bring these two issues up because it is so important for healthcare providers, those of us who help the public, to take care of ourselves first. It's just like when you're on the plane, put your oxygen mask on first so that you can then help others. And I think that we oftentimes forget to do that. And it's as simple as trying to remember to breathe, right? Many times we're under stress and we don't breathe. So I just say stop and take a deep breath in and let it out. Other simple things too, for not only healthcare providers, but for patients, is to sleep, because sleep just makes everything worse. And we know that. With a newborn baby, though, sometimes that is not easy. And that's where family comes in. I think communities of color are pretty good at supporting each other, supporting the mom, taking care of the baby. And so just encouraging the mom to rest so that she can then be healthier mentally, physically, and like Dr. Torres says, emotionally. And then there's more of mom to give to everybody else. I think that's critical. And we can't overlook nutrition for all of us. Eating a balanced diet, because what happens when we get stressed, we are tired, we're burned out, we go to junk food, right? We go to the chips, we go to the hamburgers, the french fries, the comfort food that we know is not healthy. And that just increases our sugar, and we get a big sugar down. And it just makes all of our emotions more intense. Those simple things, remembering to sleep, to have a healthy diet. And then the other thing is just to move. Right now with COVID, we've all had to be indoors. And many people, if you're working, you're sitting in front of a computer, I encourage you to raise your computer up and stand up. For my moms, I encourage them to dance. We love music. I tell them, put on some Celia Cruz, some Mark Anthony, and just move. You don't need to go outside. I know it could be hot, it could be muggy, but you just put the music on, and guess what? Before you know it, you're going to be moving and you're going to be dancing. So simple things to do. You don't have to spend extra money to do that, to do the exercise. And if you are fortunate enough to go out and go for a walk, take advantage of that and take your children, because you are, and your family, right? Your husband and the other kids, because what a wonderful way for everyone to be shut off of electronics and to talk to each other and to listen to each other. You're building up the family. Simple things that we oftentimes forget. And it's a pleasure to be able to be on the same stage with Dr. Torres and Neil, and just to reiterate the importance of mental health and of acknowledging what an important issue it is in our communities.
I think a really powerful thread that I've heard from all of you is the importance of culturally competent solutions that really understand the dynamics of our community and really the really special things that our communities have and hold. And I'd love to hear from each of you as we close off today, your thoughts about the future of psychology, the future of medicine, the future of our organizing spaces in addressing the mental health related issues that come about in climate change, and what your hopes are in regards to the different ways and the innovative ways that we can really begin to address this issue and uplift our communities in the most intentional ways possible.
Okay, well, I'll start. So I just absolutely love the things that were being said earlier, Dr. Ramos, Dr. Torres. Um, there's something that I was able to connect between what both of you had mentioned. So I work at a kids club during my regular day-to-day life. So I work with children between the ages of 3 and 12 or 13 sometimes. And one of the things that we do a lot to end the session is to have a huge dance party. And that's, if I'm being honest, it's more for me than the kids sometimes, because after a long day of work, you just want to move. Maybe you want to scream. And that's my excuse to get in the room and just scream with these kids. And so that brought a huge smile to my face because it was something that resonated so deeply with me. Additionally, a part of the work that I do, when I started this work anyway, I wanted to work with adults and I wanted to be a part of that big people conversation and have a seat at the table. But the first job I was offered, um, it was to work with children. And immediately I was like, children, like, what do you say? What do you do? And then I had to remember that there's a place in each of us that is still a child. And you have to keep that place so pristine because I think aging is inevitable, obviously, but that space, like sometimes I just lose myself in that moment when I'm taking kids on nature walks, when I'm having dance parties with them. And kids, there's a psychological term that's called tabula rasa, blank slate. They are absolutely blank slates. And so after a dance party and I sit and I explain to them why the Bahamas is a shark sanctuary or why it's important to preserve the coral reefs, children, they take that and they run with that. And that's such a huge and inspiring part of my work. And the way children are so innovative. I mean, every kid's on TikTok. Every kid knows the latest dance craze on TikTok. And so I think one of the things that we can do to kind of keep that momentum going is to meet people where they are, like we all have mentioned. So what that looks like for a lot of individuals is social media. And the idea is just to make the work accessible, make the educational tools and resources there for everyone, and to kind of bridge that gap between the common person and academia. And I'm super fortunate to exist at a very interesting intersection where I get to interact with individuals like yourselves, but as well as interacting with children. I go back to work in the morning and there are going to be so many kids waiting on me just to dance it out and to learn a bit about the environment. So as important as it is to practice rest as a form of radical self-care, get out there and move. I think that's one of the main things that I'm going to take from this conversation, because I'm someone that takes huge pride in the work that I do. But as it's been made clear by both of you, if I don't take care of myself, if I don't apply the mask first, then everyone's going to suffer because that knowledge and that momentum is going to eventually burn out.
Dr. Torres?
I don't know how psychologists in the future are going to addressing the climate changes, but I can say that how I will do it. I think that we have to back to basics. I think that we have to move the practice of psychology outside. I love to be outside. If I can in my office, I do my therapy outside under a tree or qué sé yo. I think the practice have to move to the woods, to the beaches, to the I don't know. And I think that that connection with the nature, with the earth, with the air, with the fire, with the water can make us to understand what's the importance of um take care of our planet, take care of our island, of our countries, of our nature. And I think that that connection can have to uh, we have reconnect with Mother Earth. And when we reconnect with Mother Earth and with our child, our inner child, we can start to figure out what we have to do to to have a better future for us, for our kids, for the humanity, for the world. I think that we have to go outside and go to the earth.
Dr. Ramos, you got the final word.
I am hopeful for the future and hopeful on all aspects and on the environment, on addressing the disparity, on improving equality. We made the first step, and that's recognition. You have to recognize and acknowledge, and then you can assess, get your numbers, and come up with an action plan as to how the change is going to be made. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. Neil, I love the fact that you are really helping children learn about their environment. I think that's fantastic, and recognizing the importance of the outdoors from what Dr. Torres has shared is so critical. Realizing that what we have is a treasure, because not everyone has access to being able to go outside safely and not be afraid of harm coming to them. So to recognize and appreciate that is such a critical piece. But I'm hopeful and I'm very grateful to both of you, Wawa and Felipe, for inviting us and sharing this platform on which to help us realize that health is not just mental, it's physical, it is spiritual, emotional, and there are many solutions, all for which we are already starting to address.
Thank you, Dr. Ramos. We totally agree. And what I would end is, I always say this whenever I have an opportunity to speak publicly, it's hug a tree. Just the act of hugging a tree brings you that reconnection, because we are all naturally connected to our mother earth. We just sometimes forget about it. So it sounds cliche. Yes, we're tree huggers, but that's the best way to start. Yeah, and I'm very grateful. And Wawa, please wrap it up for us.
Yeah, and that's it. I really enjoyed hearing the insight from all of you, Dr. Torres, Dr. Ramos, Neil. It's been a real honor. And I would suggest everyone watching this to follow up with the work that everyone here is doing. And I know that I'm walking away here with a much more hopeful sense of the future of holistic health, holistic care, and the importance of caring for ourselves as an active community care. So with that, I love to close off the session and thank you all for joining us here today.